Joining us now, we have Kyle Kondik. He is managing editor at Sabato's Crystal Ball at UVA Center for Politics and also author of a highly relevant book titled The Long Red Thread: How Democratic Dominance Gave Way to Republican Advantage in U.S. House Elections. Great to see you again, Kyle.
Good to see you, Kyle.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so you were pretty prescient in terms of the Virginia election. You and your colleagues moved the race to lean Republican shortly before Republican Glenn Youngkin actually proved the polls right for once and won by a narrow margin. What is your view overall of what happened here in the state of Virginia and frankly in the state of New Jersey and other places as well?
I think if you take Virginia and New Jersey together, it's interesting that when it's all said and done, Phil Murphy's margin of victory is moving up. It's about 2.5, 3 points. Looks like Glenn Youngkin won by about 2 points. And if you go back to 2017, you saw basically a roughly 11-point shift from 2017 in both Virginia and New Jersey toward the Republicans. And it's interesting that it was almost exactly the same when it was all said and done in both states, which I think was reflective of just what kind of environment we're in, which is that it's a Republican-leaning environment. And I think we saw really great Republican turnout in both states. Not necessarily bad Democratic turnout, at least in Virginia. I mean, overall turnout was very high in Virginia. But I think the combination of Republicans being aggrieved and showing up in big numbers, and also the Republican candidates likely making some gains amongst swing voters. That's how you see such a big change from 4 years ago, and even from a year ago. Obviously, both these states voted Democratic for president very comfortably last year, and I think we were sort of waiting to see what the environment actually is. Is Biden's approval rating actually that bad for Democrats? Are Republicans still enthusiastic about voting even after Donald Trump sort of made up all this stuff about the 2020 elections integrity and whatnot? And I mean, again, the answers we get to these questions, they're good ones for Republicans.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's been a lot of takes kind of on both sides here, Kyle, blaming critical race theory, wokeness, and more. I think James Carville, we have something on that. Let's take a listen. I want to get your reaction to this national discussion. Let's take a listen.
Looking at these results, your party, what went wrong?
What went wrong was just stupid wokeness. All right, don't just look at Virginia and New Jersey. Look at Long Island. Look at Buffalo. Look at Minneapolis. Even look at Seattle, Washington. I mean, just defund the police, lunacy to take Abraham Lincoln's name off of schools. I mean, that people see that.
It's interesting, Kyle, that's not just a takeaway from the center-left establishment and the media. That is also the Republican takeaway. So what do you make of that in the context of these elections?
Well, look, I think Republicans like to wage their elections on sort of cultural grounds, and they particularly like it when Democrats are easy to tie to. I don't know. I guess the best way to put it is maybe the academic left, and I think that with some of these things that the attacks that Republicans have made against Democrats. And again, it's kind of murky territory, but I think Republicans are very comfortable with this, and I think that you could argue that those attacks were effective. And in fact, after the 2020 election, the Democrats obviously they won the presidency, they won control of both chambers eventually after the Georgia Senate runoffs. But even Joe Biden was reportedly complaining about his party getting pigeonholed on this defund the police rhetoric, which I think you could sort of put in the same bucket as some of these other kind of cultural attacks that Republicans make against Democrats. And there are a lot of Democrats, I think, who feel like the Republicans have drawn blood on some of these things. And, it's not for, it's easy for Democrats to sort of complain and say, oh, well, we're being mischaracterized and this and that. But, as a party, you have to figure out ways to fight back against it and to disassociate yourself from positions and rhetoric that maybe you feel is politically damaging and the other side feels is politically damaging and is a good attack to make. And I don't think Democrats have quite figured it out on these particular topics.
Yeah.
So, Kyle, given that we now have some answers about just how bad the national environment is for Democrats, what does that mean looking forward to the midterm elections? Because when we had you on before the Virginia election, you laid out the case that Virginia can be a pretty effective bellwether of where the nation is ultimately headed. So what is your assessment there?
Well, look, I mean, I think that if the environment is, looks in next year the way it did last Tuesday, I think Democrats are probably going to lose the House and the Senate. One thing we did at our Crystal Ball newsletter was right after the Virginia election that sort of, again, to us, sort of confirmed that indeed the environment's pretty bad for Democrats. We moved some of the U.S. Senate races toward the Republicans. We had them rated as leans Democratic. Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, we moved all those races to toss up. The House situation, I think, is murky just because we're in the midst of the redistricting process, and so we don't know what the lines are going to look like in a lot of places. We're getting a sense of it. Some big states have finalized their lines, Illinois, Texas, North Carolina, although, of course, there very well could be litigation in some of these places. But, redistricting is important. But if we're in an environment where, Republicans are leading the House generic ballot polling by several points, that's the sort of environment where Republicans are going to pick up a lot of House seats, no matter necessarily how the districts are redrawn. There are a lot of governorships on the ballot next year, too. The Democrats made big gains 4 years ago, but you could see a lot of the Democratic governorships being in jeopardy, too. Places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Kansas, et cetera. So, this was kind of the check engine light came on for the Democrats on their road to 2022. I guess there's time for things to change, but also the history generally suggests that the president's party struggles in the midterm, and that's exacerbated if the president is unpopular, as this president is.
And so, Kyle, what do we also think in terms of the Senate? So where are the particular Senate seats that might be, most vulnerable, specifically in this type of election? Are we looking at Arizona? Where else are we looking?
So there's kind of like a kind of a universally agreed upon kind of big seven of Senate races. The Republicans are defending 3. They have a open seat in Pennsylvania, an open seat in North Carolina, and Ron Johnson may or may not run in Wisconsin. And then the Democrats are defending Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and then also New Hampshire. All of those states are really competitive for president, with the exception of New Hampshire, where it was really close in 2016, but Joe Biden won a bigger victory in 2020. But Republicans also may have basically their best Senate recruit in that state. Republican Governor Chris Sununu appears likely to launch his challenge to Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan. It really could be any day now, but we're waiting on that to sort of officially make that race a toss-up in our own ratings. So those are the ones to watch. But in a bad environment for Democrats, all 4 of those seats that they're defending are very much at risk. And let's say hypothetically, the Republicans were to net 4 Senate seats this time and go to 54-46. Well, that could set them up for the Senate for a little while, because next cycle, 2024, the Democrats, their most vulnerable members are on the ballot. Sherrod Brown in Ohio, John Tester in West Virginia, in Montana, and Joe Manchin in West Virginia. And so it's a bad map for Democrats in 2024 too. So it's really important for Democrats to figure out a way to hold the line here in 2022. And again, the environment is just not good. And we could talk all day about the problems that the Republicans are having with some of their candidate recruitment in some of these states, unproven candidates with domestic violence history or accusations, et cetera. But at the end of the day, if the environment's bad, a lot of those things don't mean as much as they otherwise might.
I mean, when you add the results from Virginia and New Jersey together, there's a lot of discussion of certain local issues in Virginia with regards to schools and CRT, but this really looks like a national wave. And I think, to your point, it was also incredibly predictable. Just even taking away the pandemic and how Americans feel about the country and Biden's approval rating, just looking at the history, that you're very likely to have this backlash effect. What the map looks like for Democrats. And so they should have understood, if they didn't, what a tough landscape they were ultimately facing. Kyle, I'd love you to tell us, though, a little bit about your book here, The Long Red Thread. What is the thesis of the book, and why did you want to write it?
So the book came out of a master's thesis I wrote at Johns Hopkins a few years ago. I finished up my degree there, and I wanted to explore. I've analyzed and I've written about House elections for more than a decade, and I wanted to use my getting my master's in order to explore this topic more. And so the book is essentially it's a history of U.S. House elections since the early '60s, and I started in the early '60s because that was the time of some landmark U.S. Supreme Court decisions that enshrine the concept of one person, one vote into law. And so prior to those decisions, House districts within states, some of them had 4 times more people than some districts had 4 times more people than another district in the state. So I thought that was sort of a good starting point for kind of modern redistricting. And it also starts in 1964 with the Democrats at the height of their power. They also have almost 300 U.S. House seats. Lyndon Johnson has just been reelected. And so it sort of charts how the Democrats went from, being essentially a permanent majority in the House for much of the back half of the 20th century to 1994 when Republicans took control, and then Republicans have more often held the House since then. So it gets into all these kind of big concepts like redistricting and political realignment and the nationalization of elections that I think have all combined together to give Republicans more advantages in the race for U.S. House majorities than Democrats have.
Well, very relevant, I think, to a lot of what we discuss here on the show.
All topics we explore here quite a lot. And guys, I really recommend you go out and get Kyle's book. We've been talking to you for a long time now. You are almost always right on with your analysis.
That's right.
And your predictions. So certainly one of the voices we turn to the most when it comes to election analysis.
We rely on you a lot, Kyle. Thank you, Kyle. Really appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Krystal, we're so happy that you're back.
Happy to be back.
Really appreciate
me.
it. Yeah, I know. It's not one of those good situations, but everything has worked out. We really appreciate your guys' support. As we mentioned, we've got big plans, as you guys can see here with the cameras and more, other expansions and cool things that you're going to be hearing about soon. But to do that, we need your support. There's a premium subscription down there in the link. You get the show an hour early, all the benefits, but really what you do is you support our work here and the big plans that we have. So we thank you all very, very much.
We're cooking up some good stuff, guys, that I think you're going to be excited about, that we're certainly excited about. So stay tuned for all of that. It was great to be back, and I will be back tomorrow as well, as will Saagar, for a full show. We will see you then. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.